Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode. Now, today was a huge thrill for me. I got to interview one of my favorite authors, Gretchen Rubin. She has the top podcast with her sister that is just an incredible podcast. It is called Happier with Gretchen Rubin. She's an author of The Happiness Project, Better Than Before, The Four Tendencies. I love her book, The Four Tendencies. And today we're going to dive into what those four tendencies are and how it can help you to follow a keto diet and a lifestyle or low carb lifestyle. And one cool fun fact I've always known about Gretchen is that she does a low carb diet. So we got to geek out about that on the show as well. And it was just such a thrill to have a New York Times bestselling author joining us on the show today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. All right, guys, I am so excited to tell you about the brand new version of my free ebook, Keto Reset. I first released it in 2015. I spent the entire summer working on this to make a brand new updated version, and you can get your free copy by going to ketogenicgirl.com, click on free ebook, and you can sign up for my newsletter and you will receive your free copy of the book. It covers so many different topics, including finding your optimal protein range, how to use the different macronutrients to your benefit, a starter grocery list. It's such a great place to start, and a guide to quitting sugar. I added so many new sections and expanded it, and I'm really happy with the final result. I think you guys will get a ton out of it. And if you are not a beginner to keto, there's still a ton of great information in there that you'll find. It's also a great little book to send over to anyone that you know who might be interested in getting started on keto or just learning more about the science behind it and how to test for ketosis, and all of these different things are in the book. So I hope that you enjoy it. And if you sign up for my newsletter, just know I don't send out a ton of stuff, maybe once a month at the most. If there's something I've come across that's interesting, I don't send out a weekly newsletter. I don't really like getting emails all that often myself, but when I do find something interesting that I think that you will enjoy, sometimes I'll send out a new recipe that I've worked on for the blog, or just something, an article or study that I think you might find interesting. But for the most part, it's not a high volume newsletter, so you can know that if you receive something from me, it's something I think you'll really find valuable. So you can go to ketogenicgirl.com and click on free ebook, enter your name and email, and you'll get your free copy of my brand new ebook, Keto Reset. I recommend you check out my 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. What it is a full 28-day meal plan and program that includes all the recipes and foods that you need to eat for 28 days. I call it the 28-day challenge because it's just a great way to get past all the information overwhelm. There's so much information online about keto, and this way you can just get past that. All the macros are calculated for you to get into a state of ketosis, and I was able to do that by using tried and true proven macro approaches that I've developed over several years of doing the keto diet and working with over 3,000 people to date on this program. Our Ketogenic Girl community in the members group is incredible. Everyone in there is so supportive, providing helpful tips and hints and sharing their successes and struggles and challenges as well in the group together, because we're all in this together gaining more health. The 20-day challenge program comes with weekly shopping lists, meal plan overviews, a guide to testing yourself and interpreting the results for keto, and it also comes with my support and coaching in our members only group. So go check it out at ketogenicgirl.com. It's the 28-day challenge, and any purchase of the 20-day meal plans gets you access into the challenge. You can choose to get the program either soft copy or with a printed copy as well. It's printed on beautiful paper, spiral bound, and I ship it out to you the same day. So go check it out, the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge at ketogenicgirl.com. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian. Good morning, Gretchen. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm so happy to be talking to you.
It's so exciting. You know, I was just telling you, I love your podcast. I love your books. And I remember hearing you talk about the Upholder personality, which is one of your 4 tendencies. And I immediately knew that that was me a mile away. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the 4 tendencies and how they can help people reach their goals when it comes to health and diet. And another reason I wanted to chat with you is because I know that you also follow low carb diet. So what kind of brought you to low carb initially yourself?
I write about this in my book, Better Than Before, because I think it's a great example of one of the ways people do change their habits, which is the lightning bolt. And this is a rare way, but it's great when it happens, and it happened to me. And this is when you get a piece of information or you have a new insight or something happens in your life, and all of a sudden it's just like your habits just change effortlessly overnight. Like you're like, I'm pregnant, I'm quitting drinking. You know, it doesn't happen to everyone, but it can be really powerful. And in my case, I was on spring break with my family, which I do every year, and I read a book by Gary Taub called Why We Get Fat. And I picked up the book because I had flipped through it in a bookstore and I saw that it was really a lot about insulin. And my sister, Elizabeth, who is also the co-host of my podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, has been a type 1 diabetic since her late 20s. And so I'm really interested in insulin because if you've got diabetes, insulin is super important. So I wanted to learn more about it. So I read Why We Get Fat, and he just makes the case that the reason we get fat is carbohydrates. And if you want to have less insulin in your body and less inflammation and you want to lose weight, the way to do it is to go straight for the carbs. And I mean, overnight. I went from eating oatmeal and egg white omelets and fat-free yogurt and to eating scrambled eggs, well, yolks and all, and bacon for breakfast. And I just had an amazing health effect from it. I also have a tremendous sweet tooth. And to be free from those cravings and that constant buzz in my brain, can I have it? Can I have more than one? I was good yesterday, all that stuff. Just give it up. And now I don't think about it at all. So I just love eating low carb. It's just been great for me.
That's awesome. And how long have you been following this way of life?
I should look that up. I think it's been 5 years, but it's definitely been more than 3 years. And it might be 4 or 5 or even 6 years. But I should look that up. That's a good question. But many years.
And what do you make of all the attention that low carb is getting right now, especially with sort of the keto movement and all of that? Have you ever tried keto or dabbled in that, or what's your take there?
Well, what I really love about the way of Gary Taub's approach is that he makes sort of the least necessary argument. He doesn't get into, if you eat keto or paleo, paleo asks you to think, well, what did our ancestors eat? And so that leads to the question, do we know what our ancestors ate? How have we evolved genetically? There's all these things. Keto, it's okay, what happens when you reach that certain point? Does everything change? Is it the same for men and women? There's all these sort of questions that come into it, where Gary Taub's is look, we understand insulin. This is totally well understood. It's a major hormone in the body. It's been studied for decades. We've got so many people with diabetes who are show us how insulin works in the body. For me, I'm I don't need to know about all that other stuff. Eating low carb answers my questions and gets me the result I want. So I don't really take it to that other kind of extra level, with keto, to really make sure that I'm getting underneath that level. I just have never really pushed myself to do that. But I have never really talked to somebody about their experience with it. I always think about the data point of one. If I talk to one person who's had a great experience with something, that's all. I'm often well, that's good enough for me. If it works for you, I'll try it. I think it's interesting, and I could imagine myself trying to do that one.
Hey guys, I want to tell you about a super fun giveaway contest that I'm doing from now until the end of September. You can enter by going to iTunes and leaving me a rating or review. You will enter to win a free copy of my Build Your Day meal plans. I'll ship them to you. They have over 200 delicious latest keto recipes, and you can custom build your own meal plan day by day by using the recipes and all the forms in there that I have. There are tons of resources in there and so many easy to make recipes. I also have a no-cook version of the plans, and you as a winner can choose which one you get, the regular Build Your Day or the no-cook Build Your Day. And these meal plans are an extension pack as a part of the 28-day challenge. They retail for $249, but if you are a member of the 28-day challenge, they're only $49, and I will ship you one for free if you are the winner of this contest. So to enter, you can go to iTunes and leave me a rating or review anytime between now and the end of September, and your rating or review will enter you into the contest with one entry. And you can go to Ketogenic Girl under contest giveaway and find all of the details and full contest rules there. It is open to anyone living in the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and parts of Europe as well. So go ahead and leave me a rating or review. Go to Ketogenic Girl under giveaway contest to find out more from the drop-down menu with all the full rules and requirement information there. So good luck to the winner, and thanks in advance for leaving me a rating or review. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating. There are some specific studies that have pointed to, this metabolic flexibility that for some people, it happens around the 20 or 30 gram of carb per day mark. And as soon as they go below that, they experience the switch. And then with some people, I know you're very trim and like in shape and, probably because you're very conscientious about being low carb. Some people don't need, to go to that extent. For some people, it's, just being low carb, eating whole foods makes a huge difference. So I'm curious what your family eats like, and if you've influenced your sister over the years. I know you guys are really close, and if she's ever kind of tried low carb herself.
Yeah, well, the person I've most influenced is my father. And my father, he heard me talking about it, and he was just like, he was going to try it. And he's had an amazing, he was in his 70s and he had all the typical things. He was 30 pounds overweight. His blood work was not good. It was sort of getting slightly worse every year. And I mean, he had the experience, kind of like you read about, where in the space of 6 months, he went back to his cardiologist and they were like, Jack, what did you do? Because it was like everything that was supposed to be high had gone high. Everything that was supposed to be low had gone low. Like, amazing. They were just like, what have you done? And so he just brags on it all the time. He lost a ton of weight. Even his skin looks better. I mean, it's interesting. I'm like, you look like you just had a facial, and he's 80 years old. So he's my biggest convert. And what's happened in my family? So one of the things is I always worry about the backlash, that if you really impose something like a way of eating on somebody, that then you drive them to like behind your back, go out and eat Fruit Loops or whatever, or that I just could become so tiresome talking about it, which I definitely run that risk because I love to talk about it. But what I've noticed, and this is very true of habits in general, is that when one person changes, other people just naturally begin to change for better or worse. And I'm just very consistent about it, and I don't need to make a big fuss about it, but like, I'm not going to eat spaghetti. I'm not going to eat a bagel. I'm not going to eat a piece of birthday cake, and I just don't eat it. And as I started to eat that way more and more, my family also started to change. So if we go to a restaurant and my daughter orders penne, I don't say like, you shouldn't have that, but we don't have it at home. And she just over time has started ordering it less and less because there's just this feeling, that's not really so healthy to eat that. My husband has become much more, he doesn't embrace it the way I do, but he just is like, what's the point of eating bread? What's the point of, like, he has ice cream Saturday. He'll have ice cream every Saturday, but he no longer would have ice cream. He would never eat it during the week. He just is like, we've all kind of given up potatoes, just kind of gradually, because if one person is just really very kind of a stickler about something, other people begin to adapt, which is interesting. Now, for me, you talked about being an upholder, and we'll get into that. As an upholder, it's easy for me to say, like, I just don't eat that. And to stick to it. And then I think that makes it easier for other people to stick to it too, because like for me, it's not a struggle to stick to that. And they all know the thinking about it. Like if one of my daughters had French toast for breakfast, because we're like, on our vacation, they would know, okay, you've had your treat for the day. You're not going to have something like that 3 times a day. So they do eat sugar, they do eat carbs, they do eat bread, they do eat pasta, but I think a lot less than they otherwise would. And I think as my older daughter has gotten more and more understanding it, just naturally seeing like, well, these are the choices that I want to make.
I like to think of it as, your family members can kind of lean in to low carb, not having to go, all the way in, just to see some benefits. With my own father, just getting him off orange juice and potatoes, and he lost 30 pounds, and that's amazing.
Yeah. No, and I think once you start seeing those results, then you start thinking like, okay, well, this makes sense.
Right. Absolutely. Now, I want to talk about your 4 tendencies. I really love the framework that you have, and how people can have more self-awareness as to what tendency they might have and how they can then utilize that to get better results or the best results possible when they're trying to make a diet or lifestyle change. But just real quick, I wanted to ask you, with the 4 tendencies, I know you talked before about, I think you said your husband was maybe a questioner. My husband is too. I don't know. Are there some traits that are just more masculine and more feminine? And also, are some of them dependent on age? So I could see a lot of teenagers being rebels and questioners that maybe later in life they might, change. I'm curious about those. I know that's 2 questions in one, but maybe we should start just by explaining real quick what each one is.
Yeah, those are great questions, but I'll lay out the framework and then it'll make more sense when I'm answering your other 2 questions. So this is a framework that I stumbled across when I was writing my book Better Than Before, which is all about habit change. So I was trying to figure out what are the strategies people can use to make or break their habits. And I started noticing patterns that seem to influence what worked for people or didn't work for people. Like for some people, accountability worked really, really well. Actually was like crucial. Then for other people, accountability didn't seem to matter much, or maybe it was even counterproductive. Or people had weird objections to things like that, or to me, it seemed weird. Like when I would talk to people about New Year's resolutions, some people would be like, well, I would never make a resolution on January 1st because that's an arbitrary date. And I was like, well, it doesn't really bother. Like, why is that such a big deal? But I heard it over and over and over again, enough that I realized, okay, these people are all seeing the world in a way that I don't see it, but they're seeing it in a similar way to each other. So it about melted my brain, but I finally came up with the 4 tendencies framework. And this answers the question of how do you respond to expectations, which sounds very boring, but actually ends up being an incredibly useful thing to know. So we all face 2 kinds of expectations, outer expectations and inner expectations. So outer expectations, it's like a work deadline, a request from a friend. An inner expectation is, I want to quit sugar. I want to keep a New Year's resolution. I want to start practicing guitar more. And depending on how you respond to outer and inner expectations, you're either an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. Now, I will give a brief description. And the thing is, most people can tell what they are from the brief description, but I do have like a free quiz. If you go to quiz.gretchenrubin.com, like 1.6 million people have taken this quiz, and it will tell you what you are. Like I said, a lot of times people don't need it. So you and I are upholders. So upholders, maybe that's why that's the first one that I talk about in my framework, because that's me. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. So they meet the work deadline and the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what's expected of them from other people, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. Then there are questioners. Sounds like you and I are both married to questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. They object to anything arbitrary, irrational, unjustified, inefficient. They always want to know why. So what they're doing is they're making everything an inner expectation. If they're asked to do something and it makes good sense to them, they'll do it because they think, yeah, that makes sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to them, they will push back. Next are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I got my insight into this tendency when a friend of mine said, the weird thing about me is I know I would be happier if I exercised. And when I was in high school, I was on the track team and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? Well, when she had a team and a coach expecting her to show up, she had no trouble. But when she's just trying to go on her own, it's a struggle. That's obliger. And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they want to do. They can do anything they choose to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically, they don't like to tell themselves what to do. Like they're not going to sign up for a 10 a.m. spin class on Saturdays because they're like, I don't know what I'm going to want to do at 10 a.m. on Saturday. And just the idea that somebody's waiting for me is going to bug me. So those are the 4 tendencies. Now, the tendencies are not of equal size. The biggest tendency is obliger. For both men and women, obliger is the largest tendency. And so you either are an obliger or you have many obligers in your life. Next is questioner. The smallest tendency is the rebel tendency. It's a conspicuous tendency, but it's a small tendency. But then your tendency and my tendency is also quite small. Upholder is a small tendency. Those are kind of the two extreme personality types, upholders and rebels. And there aren't that many of them. And I imagine as an upholder, you've kind of noticed that. You're sort of like, why can't other people just like get stuff done like I do? And it's like, well, because most people are not upholders. They do not see the world the way you do. They do not experience expectations the way you do. So this is really important to think about if you're trying to communicate with a lot of people. So it isn't really related to gender. And in terms of like, are all teenagers rebels or whatever, I am a big believer in the genetic roots of personality. And I do believe this is part of your genetic makeup. I don't think you're one at 20 and one at 40. I don't think you're one at home and one at work. I think these are kind of persistent aspects of your nature. Of course, it's going to be influenced by your surroundings and your circumstances. I mean, if you're a questioner and you're growing up in North Korea, you're going to learn to shut that down. If you're a questioner and you're growing up in Silicon Valley, you might be quite rewarded for that. So it might come out in a different way. And then also like for gender differences, like a lot of people say, well, are women obligers? Well, it's like, okay, this is an obliger saying something like, I'm so busy putting other people's priorities first. I have no time for me. Maybe I lack self-esteem. I just can't make any time for self-care. Things I want to do for myself always come last. That's obliger talk. But this is also obliger talk. You know what? I am such a badass salesman. I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time to exercise. Well, I'm out on the road. I give my job 110%. I'm at the top of my game. I don't have time to do that stuff because I'm always out there doing everything that my clients need. That's also obliger talk. So sometimes it kind of will take a different color. Andre Agassi is a very, very obvious obliger. And so is Oprah. So it can look different depending on kind of how it comes out in the world. But if you look at it from this very, like, how are you responding to expectations? That's how you can tell the differences among the four.
It really blew my mind when I first heard you talk about them and read about them in the book, because I have such an easy time myself following a keto diet. It's low carb and keto. I have a really easy time with it because I am an upholder. And I realize that a lot of people look to me to go, well, I need your support in helping me get there. I need to be able to be, having someone help me be accountable. And I didn't understand why it was so easy for me and not for other people. And then when I read in your book how small percentage that is, I really wanted to learn, how is it that we can, support other people in also getting to their goals when it doesn't come as easily, to uphold your own goals. And especially if some of those are some of the bigger, percentages of the population.
No, I mean, and I think that's the crucial thing. And I think that's the big gain that you can get from the tendencies is that, first of all, you understand that what works for me or does not work for me, that doesn't tell me what's going to work for someone else, because people are different from me in very significant ways. And so you can't just be like, well, if it worked for my sister-in-law, there must be something wrong with me if I can't do it. It's like, no, because you might be different from your sister-in-law. If it works for her, that's great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for you. Like, as you say, if you're trying to help other people, understanding how you might set things up in a different way might help you understand, because what works for you isn't working for them. And it's not enough to just sit around, as some upholders do, and I certainly did this myself before the Four Tendencies. We need to say, like, you know what? Just make a list, put it on the calendar, think about what's important to you, and just make up your mind and do it. And I don't understand, like, why do we keep having this conversation? That's not helpful to anybody, because it works for you, but there's a big... So how might you think about it for the Four Tendencies? Start with obligers, because obliger is the largest group, and they're often the ones that are kind of seeking help. The crucial, essential piece for obligers to meet inner expectations, like going keto or exercising more. The crucial thing that they need to meet an inner expectation is outer accountability. That is what is necessary. Now, sometimes obligers are like, well, I don't want to need outer accountability. I want to just do it on my own and be self-motivated. And my answer to that is like, well, that just doesn't work for you. So you can beat your head against the wall trying to get more motivated and trying to like put yourself first or whatever. It's not going to work. What is going to work is outer accountability. And fortunately, outer accountability is super easy to get. There's a bazillion ways to create outer accountability, because most obligers kind of one way or another figure out they need it. If you wanted to exercise more, you could work out with a trainer. You could go with a friend who's going to be annoyed if you don't show up. You could run with your dog who really needs the exercise and will be so disappointed if you don't go. You could do a 5K that's going to raise money for a philanthropy that's really important to you. You could think about your duty to be a role model for other people in your community or your family. You could think about your duty to your future self. Gretchen right now doesn't want to go for a run, but future Gretchen is going to be so disappointed if now Gretchen breaks her word to herself. You could use an app. I have a Better app where people can form accountability groups. It's like a free app called the Better app. Just search Better Gretchen Rubin. Or there's a million apps that sort of provide different kinds of accountability. You're keeping a plant alive. You're raising money. Somebody else is losing money. But the key is to figure out how to get that outer accountability. That's what works for obligers, because once they have outer accountability, there's like nothing they can't do. For questioners, it's all about the rationalization. They need to know that what they're doing is the thing that is the most efficient, is the most successful for them. So for something like going keto, what they really need is they need a lot of justification. So a lot of information, a lot of research. They also love to customize, and they love to kind of tailor things for themselves. So something that's very appealing to a questioner mind is like, okay, here's all this research. I'm going to tell you why I think this makes sense, why this is the most efficient and effective way for you to get healthy and achieve your aims. But also, why don't you try it for 2 weeks? Try it for a month. See what happens. Experiment on yourself. If it doesn't work, well, then you've learned something. If it does work, then you've learned something too. Try it out. Get that data. They always are like, why? And so if you encourage that, if you give them tons of information and then encourage them to experiment to learn more, that's often very effective for questioners. And then with rebels resist being told what to do. So they don't want, if you tell them it's a 30-day program, they're not going to do it in 30 days, or they're not going to sign up at all, unless they want to. Rebels could do anything they want to. And some love challenges and programs and pushing themselves really hard. So some rebels, it works for. What often works for rebels is identity. So what is your identity? Because rebels always want to live up to their authentic selves. So if you're like, you know what? I'm a strong, active, vital person. I want to eat healthily because that's going to allow me to put the body into the world that I want. They also hate to be controlled or chained. So another message that can work for rebels is, you know what? Those big food companies can't control me with their fancy packages and their expensive marketing campaigns. They can't addict me to sugar. They can't get me to buy their crinkly packages because I'm free. I do what I want. I want exotic, healthful food. I'm going to go to the farmer's market. I'm going to make something new every week. That kind of thing resonates with rebels. Also with rebels, information, consequences, choice. Here's the information. Here's the consequences of your action or your inaction. And then it's up to you to choose. So you could be like, well, this is what the studies show. When people eat this way, this is the kind of results they get. So, if that's the kind of result that appeals to you, then you might try this because it seems like that the information shows that works really well for other people. If you want to keep eating the way you're eating and having the kind of health and body that you have now, well, obviously you're the boss of you and you can do whatever you want, so you can appeal to the core values and kind of the expectation meeting patterns of each tendency.
That's so many great tips there for all kinds of different tendencies. And I love how you mentioned the obliger and the questioner, kind of connecting that to the future self and being accountable even to your future self. I remember reading this fascinating study where they talked about future self-attunement. And they did this study where they had people look into a mirror and they saw an old version of themselves. And they tracked the decisions that they made, after just looking at themselves in the present and then seeing a version of themselves in the mirror when they looked older. And they made all these differences, all these changes because they were now more connected and more attuned with that future self. And, there's just a lot of us don't really have that. I tend to be a future-oriented person, but I know for a lot of people, if they're more present-focused, they don't have that connection to that version of themselves when they're going to be older.
Well, you put your finger on a really important point, which is if you are an obliger or you're trying to help an obliger, it's very important to pay attention to what forms of accountability resonate, because obligers vary dramatically in what kind of appeals to accountability will resonate. It might be that something doesn't work, and so you need to move to a different kind of accountability. For instance, appeal to the future self works extremely well for some obligers. Some obligers, that doesn't work. It doesn't feel, because it's kind of an imaginative leap to think of yourself in the future as like an outer form of accountability, because it's really just you. Some obligers are like, that doesn't really work for me. Some obligers are very sensitive to money. If they pay for a class, they're going to go. They're not going to waste the money. Other obligers, no. In fact, some obligers, it's almost like they feel like if they paid for something, they've sort of as good as done it. And I remember talking to somebody who was like, well, I worked out with a trainer, but then it occurred to me that if I don't show up, he still gets paid and he gets the time back. And so she was almost feeling like obliged to not go because it was better for her trainer. I'm like, this is not working for you as an accountability. Another form of accountability that often doesn't work is your sweetheart. Often people look to their husbands or their wives or their sweethearts to hold them accountable. For some people that works, but for many people it does not work. And often you might think to yourself, well, I'm trying to hold my sweetheart accountable and they just ignore me. I keep saying, go to the doctor, go to the doctor, go to the doctor for 3 years. But then his coworker tells him to go to the doctor and he goes. Why is that? Why am I getting dissed like that? Well, it's very romantic, really, to many obligers. The sweetheart, it's like, I love you so much. It's like you're part of me. So I'm going to ignore you just the way I would ignore me. And so the accountability has to come from a more distant source, from a doctor, from a trainer, from a consultant, from a coach, from a coworker, from a boss, somebody like that, not the sweetheart who counts as inner. And so if you're dealing with an obliger tendency, you want to pay very close attention to what kind of things they find compelling and go deep into that. Because it's not like, oh, this works for all obligers. It's like, meh, like all these tools, there's a lot of variation.
That's so interesting and a really great point. Now, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, but what is it, do you think, that makes people fall into these different categories? Are there any, I know you mentioned genetics a little bit, but do you have any other theories?
I think it's genetically determined. I do. I think it's too deep and too pervasive. Also, for many people, it's very obvious what they are, like at age 3. It's not always easy to tell with children because they're not autonomous in the way that adults are. And so, like with my older daughter, it took me a really, really long time to tell what she was. But with my younger daughter, I knew by the time she was 3 or 4. And sometimes people will say things like, well, all toddlers are questioners. No, they're not. Like if you've been around somebody and you know the tendencies, or like I remember I was giving a talk and somebody said, well, all teenagers are rebels. And somebody stood up and he said, and he was like, just kind of unasked, just kind of popped up from the audience and said, no, they're not. I have 4 teenagers. Rebels are different. And so I think, little kids go through like, why is the sky blue? But, kind of that normal developmental thing. But when you have a kid who's like, for instance, here's an example of a questioner. This is, to me, is one of the most poignant examples I've ever heard. So I was talking to somebody and he was saying how in his early years of high school, he was on the soccer team and he loved playing on the soccer team. He was the goalie. He took great pride in it. He was good at it. He had a coach and then the coach changed. The new coach had this different training regimen for the players. And so this guy goes to the coach and says like, well, I see what you're having everybody else do, but I think I should have my own training regimen because I'm a goalie. So I have different skills that I need to acquire. Okay, so what are we hearing here? Information, justification, customization. What's more efficient for me, right? These are questioner values. Now, what the coach said was, everybody on the team does the same drills. You're the goalie, I don't care. You're going to do what all your teammates do. So the guy quit because he's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Right? Now, if that coach had known maybe about the questioner tendency or had been listening a little more carefully, he could have said something like, he could have done a different training regimen. Maybe that would make sense. Or he could have said something like, it would seem like that's what you should do, but I've been studying the training of the top players and the Olympic teams. And it turns out that these are the drills that everybody needs to do because even though you're a goalie, you need this, you need that, and give the justification. I'm asking you to do this. You don't think it's justified, but actually I have the research. I have the authority to tell you, and then you can respect me for that because you feel like I know what I'm talking about. As an upholder, I'd be like, it wouldn't even occur to me. I have to say, like, this is the drills you do. This is the drills you do, right? So I think it does come out in ways like that. Maybe not in any one specific situation. You could say, well, they could be this, they could be that, or maybe there's extenuating circumstances, idiosyncratic reasons why a person responds in a certain way. But when you look at the pattern of someone's behavior, you start to see them, they make the same objections. They have the same challenges. They say the same things. Anytime you hear the word arbitrary, I'm always listening for that to identify a questioner. They get there very fast. So I really do think it's just kind of, for most people, it's an inborn part of our nature.
Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 28-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group. And you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really really works well for them. And everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive. And it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com. And it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. And now back to our interview. It's so interesting. And I love understanding that my husband is a questioner, because it makes it so much easier when I can say, could you go and pick up the dry cleaning versus could you go and pick up the dry cleaning because it'll make everything better this weekend, run smoother, it'll save me time, it'll make me happy, fill in the blank, whatever it is. And then he makes that connection to the reason as opposed to just being asked, to do something. And it makes marriage a lot more smooth when it comes to, tasks and dividing things and all that. So it's been really, really useful. And I think with diet, it helps too. My husband wasn't really interested in low carb, but when I started connecting the dots, he has a lot of MS and Parkinson's in his family. And I started showing him research on the connection with, again, insulin and metabolic issues. And that kind of started getting the wheels turning. And all of a sudden, he started making these changes on his own. It is very important information to know. Now, maybe you can touch on real quick, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of each tendency?
So the strengths of the Upholder tendency, they're self-starters. They don't need a lot of supervision. Once they make up their mind to do something, it's pretty easy for them to follow through. They put a lot of value on self-mastery, so they tend to do self-mastery type things very well. The downsides, and I don't know if you've experienced it yourselves, is they can get rigid because it's like, I have my calendar, I have my to-do list. It's hard to be for Upholders often to be flexible, to go with the flow, to have sudden changes sprung on them. They often don't do well in environments where flexibility is important or where things could change dramatically. They have a lot of trouble working for rebels because a rebel might be like, you know what, new plan. This is a priority. And Upholders are like, wait, what? I had my whole day planned out. I can't move that fast. And they can also sometimes be judgmental because things come pretty easily for Upholders. And if they don't understand why other people are struggling, they can be judgmental. And they can also seem cold because for an Upholder, it's important to meet outer and inner expectations. And sometimes, even if that's inconvenient or kind of seems to other people not to take their feelings into account. So for instance, an Obliger said to me, but imagine that somebody baked you a birthday cake and they brought it in and they're like, Gretchen, I made you this wonderful birthday cake for your birthday. You have to have a piece. I would say, I don't eat cake. I'm sorry, that's a lovely gesture. I'm so happy you did it. But, I can't eat that because I don't eat cake. And they were like, well, that's pretty cold. I'm like, well, but to me, that seems appropriate because it's about me meeting my inner expectations for myself. I saw a bumper sticker that said, your lack of planning is not my emergency. That's a very kind of Upholder thing to say. Questioners, they are great they tend to love data and analysis and research. They're always pushing for justifications. They always want to do the thing that makes the most sense. So they're great to have around in the workplace because it's why are we doing this at all? Why are we using this software? Why are we listening to you? They are the ones that are trying to have that drive toward efficiency and understanding. They also are very self-motivated. Once they decide that something's important, they tend to be able to just follow through. On the other hand, they can sometimes seem, they can overwhelm and drain people with their constant questioning because it's everybody's like, oh my gosh, we've been talking about this for 20 minutes. Enough already. Or they can seem like they're not team players because questioners really need to learn to ask questions in a constructive way because otherwise their questions can make people feel defensive or attacked or undermined or well, you're not a team player because all you do is question my decisions, right? So maybe I as a boss don't like all these questions, which I think make it seem like you're rejecting my authority. And questioners can also have a problem with analysis paralysis. Not all questioners have this, but for some, their love of information and their desire to make the best choice can kind of be this black hole. And they just keep researching and researching and trying to get more and more information. And from often in life, we have to make decisions or move forward without perfect information. So questioners need to learn how to manage that. I don't know if you've experienced this with your questioner, but questioners often don't like to answer questions. And this is super annoying and ironic, but they often don't like to answer. My husband often will not answer, he will literally not answer a direct question, which is, I was always like, why does he do that? Now I know this is a thing that a lot of questioners share. The advantage of Obligers, they partner up the best with the other tendencies. They most easily. They are great leaders and coworkers and friends and family members and colleagues. They will go the extra mile. When whenever anyone is asking somebody for a favor, they almost always go to an obliger because the obliger's the one who's most likely to help you out. And really the limitations or the inconveniences of the obliger tendency falls most heavily on obligers themselves because they're frustrated by the fact that they're meeting other people's expectations, but they're not meeting their expectations for themselves. So again, the answer is outer accountability. Once they plug in that outer accountability, then they are able to meet those inner expectations. And then the rebel tendency is a very powerful tendency. They're authentic. They know exactly what they want. They're very tuned into themselves. They're great at thinking outside the box. They love to flout convention typically, but it can be very difficult to live or work with somebody who, if you ask or tell them to do something, is very likely to resist. And so rebels, others often do find it tricky. And also the strategies and approaches that work for the other three tendencies often don't work with rebels. I think rebel is the most different from the other three. So it really, really, really helps to know if you or somebody that you're working with is a rebel so that you can kind of tailor your engagement to the rebel tendency. You need to take that into account. Here's just an interesting side fact. When you have a rebel who's paired up, either in romance or at work, like you have a founding team of a company or something like that, if one of the people is a rebel, almost always the other person is an obliger. That is by far the most stable pair. So if you see rebel, you're looking for an obliger right beside them.
That's so interesting. Oh my gosh, that bumper sticker. I'm pretty sure I've actually uttered those words this weekend. Your lack of planning is not my emergency. That's hilarious. And when I read your book, I hadn't heard before about, the weaknesses, and right away, the rigidity thing just resonated with me so hard. I'm like, this is something that I can work on, is being more flexible. And I noticed it, with friends, if we make plans to, do coffee on a certain day at this time, or to change plans with like when you're traveling or eating, all that, the tension in me builds up and I go,
yes,
why do we have to change these plans? So working on being more flexible, I think reading that in your book really helped me to be more aware of that. So that was really, really helpful. But speaking of travel, what are some tips that you've maybe personally found helpful for yourself, or that you've found helpful just in doing when you're traveling and doing a low carb lifestyle? Are there anything? I know you travel quite a bit for work.
One thing is I always pack snacks because you never know when it's going to be hard to get something. I think now like airports and stuff, or even like drugstores, have things, because one of the reasons I think low carb is healthy is like you have to eat food that's been cooked. You have to eat like scrambled eggs. So you're not eating a lot of processed food, but I always do have like a bag of nuts or, different things so that if I'm really hungry and there's nothing that I can get, I can eat. Like I remember I checked into a hotel and they didn't have room service and they had like a little shop, but the little shop, it was like trail mix and scones. And I'm like, I can't eat any of this stuff. But fortunately I had like 1,000 snacks. So I just ate my snacks for dinner. And I do think too, is to sort of, and my family's gotten much better about this, is to really think like, I need to plan to eat. It's not something like, I can't just walk down the street and be like, oh, instead of lunch, let's all get an ice cream cone. Like, I think high carb food tend to lend itself to that sort of thing. Whereas I feel like with low carb, you really need to plan to eat a meal, because it's like, if I'm going to have a steak or, salmon, it's like, you got to plan to have that. So I never rely, what is it called? Not the Mediterranean breakfast. What's the name for like the breakfast when it's like all basically like croissants and bagels?
Continental
breakfast. Yeah, I'm like, give me some eggs, man. I eat so many eggs. I eat like 1,000 eggs a week. So that really helps me, is to just sort of like, if I'm traveling, I'm like, okay, well, where am I going to eat? Do I have time at the airport to eat at a little restaurant? I can't just say, okay, well, I'll just like, buy a Snickers in the shop and eat it on the plane. Like, that's not going to work for me. I don't find it that hard though. I feel like I was just in a CVS and they had this thing, it was like a pack, and it was a hard-boiled egg, a thing of cheese, and like some almonds or something like that. I forget exactly what was in it, but I was like, oh, this is clearly designed for a low carb person who needs to grab a snack.
Yes.
So that was good to see.
There are so many more options now than, I know for myself when I first started, just having more real food options that are kind of conveniently packed with, while still being real food. So it makes it easier.
My daughter just found, I don't know if you would eat this on keto, but just found these things called olives, like OLOVES.
Yes.
Do you love these? They're olives in a little pack, because I love olives and they're so filling and so flavorful, but it's like, how are you going to like carry a jar around in your backpack? But these are like these cunning little packs. I thought that was a great thing to add to my repertoire, because sometimes you just need something that you can put in your backpack.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they have the exact same fat profile as avocado, which is a little a little harder to travel with.
Yes, exactly. Well, I eat guacamole just in a dish with a spoon, and everybody makes fun of me, but I'm like, this does not need a vehicle. I do not need a cracker.
Yeah.
Now in my family with my daughters, it's like crackers are like, crackers? They have crackers? Because I'm like, we are not going to have crackers. Come on, people. So we just eat like a piece of pepperoni or a piece of cheese, we don't have crackers. And so they kind of lose their mind whenever they're around crackers.
Yeah, I have a guac recipe in my cookbook, and I put it with quarters of cabbage, and they make like little, chips, but they're like just triangles of green cabbage, and they have kind of a little bit of something to, spoon, the guac into if people really want to have some kind of delivery device, or pork rinds.
Yeah, it's funny how people just object to just eating guacamole with a spoon. Like they feel like it's not right unless it's on something. So that's a great solution. That is a great solution, because I get a lot of complaints from my family about my guacamole habits.
Now, what's a low carb food that you maybe didn't really have much in your life before you started this diet that you just absolutely love?
Well, eggs. Because before I had switched, I was eating like egg whites and stuff like that.
Right.
But now, and what I love about the egg is it's so versatile. So like I have scrambled eggs for breakfast every day. I have this wonderful hard-boiled egg maker that makes 7 hard-boiled eggs at once. So I have like a bowl of hard-boiled eggs. And so I'll use that for something. My husband often on the weekends will make a frittata. So then it's got like a lot of vegetables. And to me, a frittata tastes completely different from scrambled eggs, the way he makes it. And quiche, don't eat the crust, but the quiche. And my dad, I said how I turned my father onto this. My father buys like 3 of the 36 egg cartons at a time, because he just goes through so many eggs.
I love eggs so much, and I never get tired of them. And people get egg fatigue, and they're like, I just can't do eggs anymore. I'm like, what do you mean?
I'm like, give me the eggs. And they're so beautiful. I wish they had a different name. I feel like it's such an ugly name. It's like a blunt name, but it gives me pleasure every morning just to look at them. I think that they're one of the most the lines and the colors of eggs are I feel like it's a visual treat to make my scrambled eggs, as well as, and they're so filling and they're so kind of ubiquitous. No, I truly love eggs.
They are, I think, the world's perfect food, and God's perfect food. You just look at how beautifully they're shaped. And what are those eggs, that they decorate with gold and all the applique? And I can't remember what those are called, but people have those, in their glass cases, showing them off.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried something unusual? Yeah, Fabergé egg.
What do I eat that's unusual? I mean, I will say that I think one of the things that made it easier for me than maybe for some other people is I've always been the kind of person that basically eats the same food every day. Like some people need a lot of variety in their life. I don't need a lot of variety. And so I have like my staples, and I just go back to those. I eat a lot of salmon. I eat a lot of hamburger. I eat a lot of olives. So I haven't really come across things that are that unusual. How about you? I'm always looking for new things, though, like these olives, which was like revelation to me.
Oh my God.
I want to start eating more pickles. What are some of your favorites?
Oh man, I mean, I love eggs too, but I do a lot of sauces and things with eggs, like a lot of steak with béarnaise sauce, hollandaise, and like egg benedict and that kind of thing. My palate has completely shifted. I had a sweet addiction most of my life, and then going keto, it's completely gone. I don't even use sweeteners anymore. I just do whole foods, and it's all savory, and I taste, eggplant and roasted eggplant tastes like banana to me now. It's amazing how your taste buds will recalibrate to that savory sense. And that just simplifies life for me, because I see food more as fuel now, as opposed to this comfort or entertainment that can really become a fixation, as opposed to just, I'm just going to eat and it's just going to fuel me, and I'm going to enjoy my, steak or whatever it is, low carb meal, but without, fixating on it or having that, craving, like you said, and blood sugar. My blood sugar is very, very stable now.
I so agree with you on all those. And that's part of the intense pleasure of it, is like the food is just food, and like you're excited to eat because you're hungry, but it doesn't have this like buzziness and this excitement and like confetti going off in your mind. And I actually now, when I feel that feeling, when I'm like, this is so great, like I'm like, what is in this? I had some pulled pork. I didn't really know what was in pulled pork. And I'm like, this is amazing. I want to eat like 3 platefuls of this stuff. So I look it up. Of course, it's like slathered in ketchup and honey mustard sauce and stuff like that. I'm like, when I have that feeling that like, I can't eat enough of this, I want seconds, I want thirds.
Yes.
Because like, scrambled eggs, you're not going to eat 10 scrambled eggs. It's just like at a certain point, you're like, you know what, that was really nice, but I'm not going to go up for thirds because it's like, it runs itself out. I completely agree. And this is the thing that I'm always saying to people when I'm trying to badger them into doing this, which my sister calls me a happiness bully, and I try to resist, is that people feel like they're giving something up. Like somebody said to me, but I feel like life without eating a brownie is like, what kind of colorless, awful life is that? And I'm like, you can't imagine how much more I love not eating a brownie. That gives me so much more joy than eating a brownie ever could. And there's all these other things, like you're talking about béarnaise sauce and steak. I mean, there's all these delicious things waiting for you. So it's not like you're going to be eating lettuce for the rest of your life. There's all these delicious foods that you can eat, and that becomes what you want. And the other things, just you don't eat them, so they just kind of fade away. And it's just so, to get that noise out of my head was such a relief. Like Halloween, I used to hate Halloween because it was like bite-sized things are always my downfall. Oh, it's just a bite-sized Snickers. It's just it's a little crackle. There's like cunning little candy bars. And my kids would go to school and I would sneak their candy. And it was like, could I have 1? Could I have 2? Could I have 3? Blah. And now I'm like, people would bring it to work and it's sitting there for free, and you'd go into a store and they have and it's like, can I have it? I've had 3 already. Is this too much? And I'm like, I don't eat Halloween candy because I don't eat candy. And so it's like, you can put your Halloween candy gigantic bowl right next to me and it doesn't even flicker in my mind. It's like, I don't eat that. I don't eat that. So it's fun. I love looking at candy. I'll go into Dylan's candy bar and look at the candy. I wish there was something else to do with candy because I love candy.
Yes.
Except I don't want to eat it.
It is so colorful and
it's so fun.
It is. And it's just all these happy connections with childhood and all that. And I find it so interesting that just having, a bowl of candy, I know maybe you have some tips for people who are in an office environment.
Yes.
Because I've read a lot about how just having, someone bringing in donuts, and maybe you guys were talking about it on a podcast, how it's eating away kind of at your willpower just to know that it's in the same environment because your brain registers that there's an energy source nearby.
Yeah, you're exactly right. On the podcast, many times we've talked about the evil donut bringer. So I work at home, so I have a lot of control, which I feel very lucky about. But my sister is a TV writer and showrunner. So she's a showrunner of a show that's going to be on ABC. And one of the things about Hollywood that everybody remarks on, and they're actually contractually obligated to provide a lot of this, is there's just massive amounts of free food and you can just get anything you want. You just like, as a writer, you'd be like, you know what, I really want Lay's potato chips. And they'll go out and put it in the cupboard. You can have anything you want. It's all over. Plus, there is a strong tradition of like, oh, it's the first day of shooting. The agency is going to send over like the fanciest cupcakes in Los Angeles as a congratulation. Or there's the person that my sister calls the evil donut bringer, which is the person who's like, oh, to kind of like make everybody happy in the office, I'm going to stop off and buy a giant box of donuts. And actually, my sister and I regularly get a lot of people really pushing back and saying, you say it's the evil donut bringer, but I do it and I don't think it's evil. And like, you shouldn't be so negative. And people love my donuts, so I don't know what you're talking about. And the problem is they lose their minds. They're like so excited. They crowd around you. You get an enormous sense of satisfaction from seeing all these people like be so happy. But the fact is, it's not good for anyone. And if you said to somebody the next day, are you glad you ate that donut? Or maybe there's 3 donuts that you had, or like the stale donut you had this morning because it was left over. Usually they'd be like, no, I really wish I had not had that donut. And so one of the things we've talked about is like, well, what are other things that you could bring if you want to say congratulations or you want to create that goodwill in an office? The fact about sweets is that they're cheap, they're easy, they're ubiquitous, and they're fun. So you can go to Costco and get a giant thing of candy, and it's easy for you and it's cheap for you, and everybody seems really excited. It's harder to think of something else. What would you get instead? That takes some pondering. But like on my sister's set, because she has another podcast called Happier in Hollywood, and she and her co-host, who's her writing partner, talk a lot about this. And as I said, my sister's a type 1 diabetic, so it really matters to her. So for her birthday, Sarah had a birthday, and she also is always talking about the evil donut bringer. So for her birthday, the office got her shots of green juice. So there were big trays of shots of green juice, and that was what the celebration was, rather than getting her a cake. So they sang happy birthday to her. They had the green juice shots. And so it was festive and it was different. And it was like everybody had that moment of like, ooh, we're having something. But they did it in a way that was right for her because she was so upfront about the fact that like she quit sugar for the year. And she's like, I'm not eating that stuff. So I think it takes some getting into it. And I think, and I read about this a lot in Better Than Before, I think one of the things that helps is bright line rules. I never buy anything from the vending machine. I always bring lunch from home so that you're not in a like decision making place. Yeah. And another thing that helps too, and is abstainers and moderators. And this is true, keto or low carb or whatever, is kind of it naturally appeals to abstainers. But an abstainer is somebody who does better when they give something up altogether. So they never have something. And they find that easier. They just put it aside, like, oh, I just never eat sugar. I never eat potato chips. My sister gave up French fries because she's like, they're her kryptonite. She just can't have one. You know, she could have one of, you know, she could have a little bit of other things, but not French fries. Then moderators get kind of panicky or rebellious if they're told they can never have something. So they do better when they have it a little bit or they have it sometimes. And these are the people who I could never, because I'm a total all or nothing person. And as we were talking about, I have a huge sweet tooth historically. There'd be people who would like, oh, I have this fancy bar of Toblerone chocolate in my desk drawer. And every day or two, I have like one little triangle of chocolate and that's all I need. And I'd be like, my whole day, I would be thinking, now, later, 2, 3, it's raining. It's, you know, I deserve it. I would eat that. I might as well eat it at 8 a.m. because my whole day is going to be wasted with me debating about the chocolate bar. So it's important to know if you're a moderator, it's better to be moderate than to try to abstain because they get kind of nutty if they're told that they can never have something. But then abstainers find it far easier. And what you find is that abstainers and moderators are constantly telling each other they're doing it wrong. Well, it's not that one way's right and one way's wrong, or that moderation is better. It's like, moderation is not better for me. And I constantly have people trying to tell me, oh, follow the 80-20 rule. You shouldn't be so rigid. You're going to fall off the wagon if you never. And I'm like, it's not healthy to eat this way. I'm like, why is it more healthy to eat some sugar than no sugar? Like, this is what works for me. You do what works for you. I'll do what works for me. So I think that's an important distinction as well. And if one way isn't working for you, try the other way. I think a lot of people assume that abstaining is hard, but I think for a lot of people, it's actually easier. So much easier for me.
Oh, that's such a great point that you bring up. Yeah, I'm a maximizer and I also an abstainer. And I always, say, well, does it make sense to have a moderate amount of, cocaine or heroin if you're an addict? It doesn't make sense to me. It's all or nothing. But I never thought about, there are some people that, just do better with moderation and not abstaining. And that's such an important reminder. Well, Gretchen, it was so fantastic having you here today.
Yes, I feel like we could talk all day. We're interested in all the same things.
I know. I love it. It's been such a thrill and honor to get to speak with you. I love your books. I love your podcast. I listen to it every week and it's just such a thrill. And I know that you're an upholder and low carber too. So it was so fun to get to chat with you. Now, where can people follow more about your books and your podcast and tune into that?
So I have a website called GretchenRubin.com where there's links to everything. So you can learn more about my books. There's a lot of resources there if you want different kind of discussion guides or different things that are meant to help you be happier or change your habits or understand the Four Tendencies. If you want to take the quiz to know your tendency, again, that's at quiz.GretchenRubin.com. That's a free quiz. It's very short, only 8 questions. And that'll tell you what you are and give you a little report about what you could learn. My podcast is called Happier with Gretchen Rubin. And so every week with my sister Elizabeth, who's an Obliger, we talk about how to be happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative. So it's all very realistic, manageable stuff that you could just do as part of your everyday life. And we're sisters, so we do not let each other get away with much during our discussions. And I'm all over social media as Gretchen Rubin is my handle. And I love to engage with listeners and viewers and readers with people's observations and questions and insights. So just look me up wherever you go. I have a free newsletter you can sign up for on my site, right? Once a month, I have, I do a roundup of some stuff that I think is interesting. Oh, and I also have a daily newsletter of a happiness quotation. I'm a huge reader and I love quotations. I have this gigantic trove of quotations. So if you want a happiness quotation to start your day every day, you can also sign up for that for free. So yeah, GretchenRubin.com is kind of the storehouse of all of that different material.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Gretchen. And we'll be sure to put links in the show notes to all of those fantastic resources and really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.
Thank you guys guys so much for tuning in today. I had such a thrilling time getting to chat with one of my favorite authors, Gretchen Rubin, and it was so much fun to get to geek out with her on all of the psychology, personality aspects, and also on low carb, and get to chat with her about her experience and why she's been doing low carb and how she incorporates the lifestyle into her busy life, because she is so prolific. She's written so many books. She has an amazing podcast, and it's really cool to see her thriving and doing so well on low carb, and I'm pretty sure some of it is being fueled from ketones and all of those healthy fats and proteins. So thanks so much for tuning in. If you guys like the show, please leave me a rating or review. It really makes a huge difference, and I love reading your comments and ratings, so leave me a comment there. And if you'd like more information on the 28-day challenge, or if you'd like to grab my free ebook, you can do so at ketogenicgirl.com. Head over there and click on free ebook, and you can sign up to my list, my newsletter list, and receive your free copy of Keto Reset. And there's also some meal plans and programs if you'd like to explore more about the 20-day challenge. You can do that all at ketogenicgirl.com. So thanks again for tuning in today, and until the next episode, I hope you have a fat-filled rest of your day.